Welcome to Crimson Coffin Chronicles. Tonight, you'll hear 3 true stories of those who vanished, of those who fled, and of those who knocked when no one should have. Some mysteries never leave you. They wait in the dark, patient and unseen. Listen closely, and remember, not every story ends when the door closes. They knocked so softly I almost thought I imagined it, until I saw the 2 children standing perfectly still in the dark, waiting to be let in. I've never talked about this before. Back then, in the late 90s, lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas. It was a quiet place surrounded by cotton fields and dirt roads. I worked nights unloading trucks and usually got home around 3 a.m., bone-tired and grateful for the silence. One evening in September, a storm rolled in while I was driving back from my shift. Rain hammered my windshield, lightning forked across the sky, and the wipers barely kept up. I pulled into my gravel driveway just after 2:30 and sat there a moment, waiting for the downpour to ease. That's when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision to small figures standing at the end of the drive, right by the fence. At first, I thought they were kids from a neighboring ranch who'd gotten caught in the storm. They didn't wave or call out, just stood shoulder to shoulder, faces tilted toward my headlights. I squinted through the rain. No umbrellas, no coats, just pale skin and dark clothes already soaked through. It felt wrong. I can't explain why. My gut twisted in a way it never had before. I cracked my window an inch and called out, "Hey, you okay?" They didn't move, didn't even flinch. Lightning illuminated their faces for a split second, and that was when the fear really started. Their eyes looked too dark. I thought it was shadow, but something about them seemed empty. I turned off the engine and listened. The rain softened. No footsteps approached. But then, without my seeing them move, they were suddenly standing at the driver's side window. I flinched so hard my elbow hit the door. The taller one, a boy, maybe 10 or 11, leaned closer. His voice was flat and polite. "Can we come in?" I could barely breathe. I felt pinned in place, like if I moved too fast, something terrible would happen. "You're lost," I managed. My voice sounded thin. "Where are your parents?" "Our parents will come," the boy said. His mouth didn't quite match the words. "We can't come in unless you say it's okay." That's when I really looked at their eyes. They weren't reflecting the dash lights at all. They were solid black like polished stones. No whites, no irises, nothing. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Some instinct older than sense screamed at me to start the car and drive, but I was too afraid to turn my back on them. "We have to come in," the boy said again, voice soft as rain on the roof. "Please, we're cold." Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't pleading, it was like he knew the words, but not the feeling behind them. I shut the window, locked the doors, and flicked the ignition. My headlights swung over the fence, and for a heartbeat the kids were gone. Then they reappeared a foot closer, standing directly in front of the hood. I shifted into reverse, hands shaking so badly I could barely keep my foot on the brake. The boy tilted his head. His lips didn't move this time, but I heard the words as clearly as if he whispered them in my ear. "If you let us in, it will be over faster." I backed down the driveway so fast I almost hit the ditch. The kids didn't follow. They just stood there, rain streaming down their faces, watching my taillights disappear. I drove to a diner off the highway and sat in the parking lot until dawn. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The whole time, I half expected to see their faces in the side mirror. When the sun finally rose, I crept back home. The yard was empty. No footprints in the wet gravel. No sign anyone had been there at all. 4 weeks after, I barely slept. Every time a branch brushed against the house or the floor creaked, I thought they'd come back to finish what they started. But it didn't end there. A week later, I woke up feeling sick, weak, nauseous, like I'd been poisoned. The doctor said it was probably a virus. I never told him about the kids. Since then, I've read other accounts, people who claimed the black-eyed children brought more than just fear. Sudden illness, accidents, family tragedies, all starting the night they came knocking. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd unlocked the door, if I'd said, "Yes, you can come in." Sometimes, on stormy nights, when the power flipped, I imagine them still out there waiting by the fence line for someone too tired or too kind to say no. No one could explain why the Tromp family left their farm that morning, only that by nightfall, they were convinced someone was hunting them. The first time I heard about the Tromps, I was living in Melbourne, scrolling through local news before work. The headline was strange enough to make me pause. Family of 5 vanishes on bizarre road trip. At first, it sounded like the kind of clickbait you see all the time, a publicity stunt or a hoax. But the more I read, the more unsettling it became. It started early on a Monday in August 2016. The Tromps owned a successful berry farm near Sylvan, Victoria. People who knew them described them as quiet, polite, hard-working. They had no criminal history, no known debts or feuds. By all accounts, they were a normal, close-knit family. But that morning, without any warning, Mark Tromp loaded his wife Jacoba and their 3 adult children Rihanna, Ella, and Mitchell into the family SUV. They left behind their phones, their credit cards, and their passports, as if they expected to be tracked through anything electronic. Police would later call it a case of folie à plusieurs, a shared psychosis, but at the time, no one could fathom why they left or where they thought they were going. According to the timeline investigators reconstructed, they drove north with no clear destination. Mitchell would later testify that his father was convinced someone was listening to their calls, reading their thoughts, monitoring their every move. Whatever Mark believed, it spread to the rest of them like a virus. By the second day, the tension inside the car had grown unbearable. Mitchell was the first to break. He told his family he was done running and took a train back to Melbourne. Though he kept his phone, he left it hidden under the seat. Even in his doubt, a part of him feared someone might still be listening. The remaining 4 pressed on. Witnesses would later describe the family's odd behavior, how Mark and Jacoba scanned the horizon at every stop, eyes darting to the mirrors, voices low and urgent. A gas station clerk remembered how Ella and Rihanna stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the car as if something might crawl out of the trunk at any moment. At some point, they reached Bathurst, hundreds of kilometers from home. There, Ella and Rihanna made their own escape. They must have realized whatever they were running from had grown bigger inside their parents' minds than anything outside. But even after splitting away, the fear clung to them. Rihanna broke into a stranger's house, so panicked she hid under a bed. When police found her, she was shaking and unable to explain what she was hiding from. Meanwhile, Ella tried to drive home, but was soon reported missing as well. Mark and Jacoba continued alone, deeper into the Blue Mountains. No maps, no credit cards, no plans, just the conviction they were being hunted. The story gripped Australia. News crews staked out the farm, trying to understand how 5 adults could abandon everything overnight. Psychologists speculated about shared delusion. Some reporters whispered about cult involvement, but none of it accounted for the eerie details in the police reports. A truck driver who passed them near Janellen Caves said Mark's eyes were glassy and distant. He claimed Mark stared through him as if he wasn't there and whispered, "They're already here." The parents were eventually found. Days later, Jacoba wandering along a roadside, dazed, unable to remember how she got there. Mark was the last to be recovered, discovered alone near a dam, pacing in circles, muttering under his breath. When authorities finally pieced everyone back together, no clear explanation emerged. Toxicology showed no drugs, no record of mental illness. Just 5 people who, over the course of a few days, unraveled completely. I kept thinking about the details, the way they left behind anything that could identify them. The fact that even the children, grown adults, fell under the same spell of fear. How does a family go from a quiet farm in Sylvan to scattered across the countryside, too terrified to use their names? Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove out to Sylvan to see the Tromp farm for myself. It looked perfectly ordinary. Neat rows of berry bushes, a gravel drive winding to the house. But standing at the gate, I felt a discomfort I couldn't name. The wind hissed through the leaves, and I imagined the moment they decided to flee. It must have felt like to believe that nowhere was safe, that something was closing in. As I stood there, I heard a rustling in the hedges. I turned, heart hammering, but there was no one, only empty rows stretching to the tree line. For just a moment, I felt the same kind of dread I'd read about. That was when I understood. Fear doesn't always need a reason. Sometimes it just arrives, like a fog, and before you realize it, you're running too. In the years since, the Tromps had mostly stayed silent. They returned to the farm eventually, but reporters say they live more withdrawn than before, never speaking publicly about what happened. If you ask around Sylvan, you'll hear hushed theories that the farm is cursed, that the family uncovered something they shouldn't have, that maybe it wasn't all in their heads. But the truth is simpler. and far more frightening. Sometimes, all it takes is one whispered thought someone is after us to crack reality. One seed of doubt that grows until it strangles everything else you know to be true. And when that fear takes hold, you can never be sure whether you left the danger behind or brought it back home with you.
He looked right into the security camera as if it could save him, then turned and sprinted out of the airport, vanishing into the trees beyond the fence. Most people who hear about Lars Mittank think it's just another missing person story, one more name on a long tragic list. But when you look closer, the details start to feel like something darker, something that doesn't fit neatly into any explanation. Lars was a 28-year-old German man who went to Varna, Bulgaria in June 2014 with friends. He was the last person you'd expect to just disappear, quiet, good-natured, the kind of person everyone described as dependable. He worked as a technician close to his family, no history of mental illness. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. They swam in the Black Sea, drank cheap beer on the beach, and watched World Cup matches in small, crowded bars. Then, on June 30th, Lars got into a fight with 4 other men over a soccer rivalry. Witnesses said it wasn't serious, some shoving, a few punches, but Lars ended up with a ruptured eardrum. A local doctor examined him, prescribed an antibiotic called cefuroxime, and told him not to fly until the pressure healed. His friends offered to stay behind, but Lars insisted he'd be fine alone, that they should go home as planned. That was when everything began to unravel. The first calls home were calm. Lars told his mother that he was resting, waiting for the swelling to go down. But then, overnight, his tone changed. He sent her frantic texts, claiming people were following him, trying to poison him. He said he had to escape. She asked who he meant, but he wouldn't say. His voice was low and hoarse, as if he was afraid someone was listening. He checked out of his hotel abruptly and took a taxi to a cheaper place closer to Varna airport. The driver would later say Lars looked exhausted, eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror. He told the driver he needed to get away somewhere safer. At the new hotel, security cameras captured hours of unsettling behavior. Lars pacing the hallways barefoot at 1 a.m., pressing his ear to other guest doors, peeking through cracks, as if he expected someone to burst in. He called his mother again, whispering that he was hiding and didn't know who to trust. No one knows exactly what he thought was happening. But by dawn, he seemed to have resolved to go home. He left most of his luggage behind: wallet, clothes, his passport. All he carried was a small shoulder bag and a look of raw, sleepless dread. The footage from Varna airport that morning is what has haunted me ever since I first saw it. Lars walks in looking tense but controlled. He checks in with airport staff, explains about his ear injury. A medical worker examines him in a small, sterile room. According to the doctor, while they were talking, a construction worker in a yellow vest stepped into the hallway to check something on the wall. That was when Lars froze, eyes going wide. For a few seconds, he didn't speak, just stared past the doctor toward the doorway. Then, without a word, he stood up, left all his belongings on the chair, and walked out of the examination room. Security cameras picked up the next moments in stark, silent detail. Lars breaking into a jog as he passed the check-in counters, and sprinting flat out across the tiled terminal. He burst through the sliding glass doors into the parking lot, dodged startled travelers, and ran straight across the tarmac toward the fence line. He reached the tall wire fence, and without hesitating, climbed it in seconds. Then he dropped to the other side, and disappeared into the overgrown scrub that borders the property that was the last time anyone saw him. Search teams scoured the area for days. Helicopters circled the pine groves and sandy gullies. Police with dogs followed every trail they could find. But there were no footprints past the fence, no scraps of clothing, no calls from a stranded traveler, no remains. It was as if the earth itself swallowed him. People came up with explanations, some more believable than others. Maybe it was a delayed reaction to a concussion from the fight. Maybe a psychotic break triggered by antibiotics, a rare but documented side effect. Maybe an untreated infection that reached his brain, but the timeline never added up neatly. His mother insisted that in those last calls, she heard real terror, something more than confusion or illness. She said it was as if he believed he was moments away from being taken. And that's what keeps me awake some nights. The thought that he wasn't just imagining it, that something or someone was watching him in Varna, that he saw something none of us were meant to see. Every so often, rumors surface. A gaunt man in ragged clothes spotted near the train lines. A traveler who swears he met a German drifter who refused to give his name. Police follow up, but nothing ever pans out. Years later, I traveled to Varna myself, partly out of morbid curiosity, partly because I thought standing in that place might make the story feel more real. The airport was just as you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, humming vending machines, tired travelers wheeling suitcases across dull linoleum. I stood in the doorway where Lars had bolted. It felt painfully ordinary. But for a moment, I had the unmistakable sense that if I turned fast enough, I'd see him standing there, thin, pale, waiting for someone to believe him, waiting for help that never came. That's why this story feels different from other disappearances, because Lars didn't just vanish. He fled, as if every second counted. He looked like a man who had seen something none of us could imagine, and whatever it was, sent him running into a place where no one has found him since. And as much as I want to believe it was all in his mind, a small part of me wonders if he was right. That there was something waiting beyond the fence line, something patient enough to follow him wherever he ran. Thank you for watching Crimson Coffin Chronicles. If these stories unsettled you, you're not alone. Subscribe for more true horror. New nightmares arrive every week. Until next time, leave the lights on.